Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of When Artist Speaks. I am so glad to be here with y'all. As I mentioned in the previous episode, we are now transitioning. At the very beginning of season one, we had an opportunity to meet and engage in conversation with some students from Virginia Commonwealth University who are a part of the Black Art Student Empowerment organization, and there's more to come from them. So don't think that we're out of the door with them yet, but I did want to transition and talk to another facet of artistry, and that is poets. Because as many of you know, I am a spoken word artist. I absolutely love poetry. I love writing. I love reading it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I have one of my favorite poets who just happens to be my friend, Miss Wanesha V. Spencer. So I'm not going to talk too much right now. I'm going to turn it over to her and give her an opportunity to tell you guys a little bit about her. And then in this conversation tonight, I hope you learn a little bit more about Wanesha and you are just as enamored with her as I am. So thank you for being here, Wanesha. The floor is yours. How you doing tonight?
I am doing great. First and foremost, thank you so much, Stacy, for one just creating this platform. Like you're always creating space. I always say this to you. You're always creating space. To share, to make sure that you are not only creating space for yourself, but it's creating space for other poets and artists. So I hats off to you. I appreciate you. Love you for that. But it's good, definitely good to be on your podcast tonight. Again, like she said, my name is Wanesha V. Spencer, poet, spoken word artist, and originally born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida. Definitely love my hometown. Moved away after graduated from the University of South Florida, located in Tampa. Moved here to Atlanta. Next year in August will be 15 years.
Wow.
So yeah, made that move 15 years ago. And as it relates to artistry, it's been an absolute blessing for me. Poetry is definitely it's the ministry. For me, it is ministry work. And I enjoy doing it. I enjoy sharing my heart with others through words.
Well, listen, I'm always happy to be in spaces with you. I tell you that all the time. So for anybody that thinks, oh, you're doing stuff on camera that you don't do off, no, y'all don't know. I am a fan. So when we became friends, I was like, boom, God, this is it. This is how you do it. Because I want to let, the listening audience in on something. I met Wanesha. I was invited to an event. I cannot remember the name of the coffee house, but it was out in Decatur.
Urban, no,
No, it wasn't Urban
no,
Grind.
no, no, it wasn't Urban
It
Grind.
was, it was because it was so. The late Evelyn T. Keener used to have
Yeah.
these events, right? Evelyn was really good at promoting. She was a great promoter. She was a philanthropist, and she was also
Absolutely.
she did a lot of work, nonprofit work in the community. But she used to host these events. I believe
Poetry and conversations.
Poetry and Conversations. That's it. So she used to host these events, and she would have all of these different artists and variety of artists and poets from all over the city. So she had an event, and I went to, view and see another poet that I had started following. And there just happened to be three poets on the stage, female poets. And I had never really encountered the other two. Wanesha was included in that number. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm sitting there, I'm all excited because I'm getting exposed to the Atlanta spoken word scene. I'm getting exposed to the poetry scene on a public speaking, from a public speaking perspective, because I started out writing. I wasn't doing it publicly, but I was getting ready to start publishing things and doing stuff. And I looked on stage and I saw Wanesha, and I don't know, to how, what it means to many people, but for me, representation matters. And so, number one, I hadn't seen anybody really on the scene that looked as close to me as she did. Number one, she had this big curly hair. She was, I mean, dressed to the nines. It was real comfortable and cute, but it was put together. You know what I'm saying? And then she started talking about Jesus. Now, when that's what did it for me, because I had only been exposed for the little bit that I had seen to a lot of conscious poetry, a lot of um, erotic poetry, a lot of kind of like self-reflective poetry, but nothing that really like talked about Jesus and reverenced God. And I was like, oh, so when I would go into those open mic spaces prior to seeing Wanesha and experiencing one of her poetry sets, I always felt odd because I would be like, well, I'm not about to get up here and do a bunch of metaphors. And I'm not about to get up here and talk about this, that, and the third. I'm about to just talk about what was on my heart, which was Jesus. And so that's how I came to experience her as an artist. And I was blown away. And then I had an opportunity to just kind of see her in other spaces and things like that. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to get into tonight. And so I'm going to kick this thing off by asking the question. And the question is this: how did you get started in, I know you have a journey of poetry, so I know they kind of marry, but how did you get started as a spoken word artist? Like, when did that I'm gonna get out here and say what I need to say in all of these notebooks I got filled up, I'm gonna say this on a microphone, even if it's just to one person? How did you start that?
Okay, and I'm going to say before I answer that question, I love your question because I think oftentimes, when typically, as poets, as artists, when we're asked that question, we go back to, oh, well, I wrote my first poem when I was, and so that's a difference between when you first started writing versus like your question. Well, when was that moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to step into this arena and I'm going to start
Mm-hmm.
sharing? So I just wanted to say I love the question, but to go ahead and answer. Actually, the funny thing is, it's weird because I didn't really find spoken word. It kind of found me in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is because luckily, I grew up in a church, Pleasant Grove Missionary Baptist Church, where the Reverend Joseph Gordon was my pastor. And one of the things I
You
loved
better
about
shout them out like a Baptist, because that's what they, you got to get a whole pastor name. Like, you better.
that part.
Go
Um,
ahead.
but he's retired now. But one of the things that I appreciated about being up under that ministry, especially being a little girl and up into my young adult ages, is that they created space. Like my church literally created space and allowed me, like they honed in and they helped nurture the gift. Because I went in, I started writing, while I was there, in terms of being a younger age. But when I started sharing, the very first platform that I had to share was church.
Mm.
So for me, it was, be it Father's Day, Easter, and I know that it's still a step ahead of like, I'm sorry, a step behind going out, into the highways and byways. But when I first started sharing, the messages, the words that God had placed on my heart, I'll say that the church, it was that grooming space that made me comfortable with my message. It made me comfortable with what I had to say. I also think because poetry for me started out as ministry, because I started there, it was really, really easy for me when I started going out beyond the four walls to still take and keep the same message.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's
Mm-hmm.
what it was. The only difference for me is that because I realized that the church, I mean, even though yes, we meet in a building, but the church is definitely not a building. We are the church. We are called
Mm-hmm.
to plug in, get charged, and go out. And so, I'll say, even though for me, I approached it as ministry because it was, but I was never immune to the fact that we're all out here living and doing, experiencing real life. And
Mm-hmm.
so while I started within the church with the poetry, like all of my poems was, and you've heard it, my poems weren't necessarily like Jesus, 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 Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Like, no, like I'm talking about, the things that I'm experiencing in real time, but also pointing to, Christ who has helped me, process and go through and deal with, and sustain through it all.
And see, I like how you frame that up, because for me, that's exactly what Jesus encompasses. Sometimes we can make him, so he is a deity, he should be reverenced, absolutely, but we don't make him relatable. And so
Yeah.
your experiences and the way you talked about it, like, the way you talked about it in your poetry, um I don't know, it to me, like, to out to the untrained ear, I heard, Jesus in a way that Jesus had never been presented before, right? And it was less intimidating, but no less revering. Like he still was very much reverenced, but he wasn't so far away in the way that you speak about him. And so I absolutely, that's one of the things that I do love about your artistry. I love that, um, you know, I love that in the spaces that I have been in with you, it really does dispel the idea of comparison. It encourages and inspires you to, really do your best because you see her bringing her best and not necessarily, oh, she's better than me and this, that, and the third. And so as you all are listening to Wanesha speak, you see she has a very clear and soft voice. But if you have not heard her poetry, we're going to get into some ways you can hear some of her poetry, and you're gonna see that the voice you hear here is not the voice you hear when it's on that microphone. It takes on its own, and it is so, it's very powerful. It's very pointed. I absolutely love it. So I want to get into, and this is something that I have asked every artist that I've had on this podcast, and that is about community. And the reason why I always come to community is because I think I want to drive the point home for the people that take the time to listen to this podcast is how important it is to have community. And I mean a quality community. I'm not talking about a whole bunch of people around you because they like what you do or what you can do for them. I'm talking about quality community that holds you accountable. Like, say, for example, you share something with a friend that you want to do, and then life gets a hold of you and you decide, oh, I'm not gonna do that. And that friend will be like, but nah, you got something you gotta birth out of you. You got something you gotta do. So for you, how important was it to, number one, have community as you were embarking on your journey as a spoken word artist, and some of the other things? Because I definitely want to get into your philanthropy. I definitely want to get into some of the movements that you've done in the community and things like that. But how important is it for you to have community, and what was that process like as your community shaped? Like, you might have started out here, but now as you've matured in all of your gifts and all of the things you've done, you now have a different perspective on community, and so you're maybe even a little more selective about the type of people you have around you. So
Right.
number one, how important is community to you?
Community is extremely important. To me, it's top tier. One of the things I know for sure is that I know God did not create any of us to be an island. Like, there's a poem where I have, an island doesn't exist. An island would never exist without water and trees. Everything serves a purpose and contributes to a need. So
Mm-hmm.
if even an island in itself, you're not going to find an island by itself because there are other things that make up that island. We are not called to do life by ourselves. And so I'll say this, and as it relates to the artistry, like, while I do have a lot of friends that are definitely artists, I don't collect artists, I collect friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know, like, that there are some, and I feel like in that instance, because what happens is, if you confine yourself to sometimes like the community of just artists, well, what happens when that artist is no longer sharing? What happens when
Mm-hmm.
that artist needs to take a break? And so I've been blessed enough to where I have found friendship, like some of my closest friends. And I'm going to say this, and I know you won't mind, Stacey. Like, don't get it twisted. I might be we're both sitting in our different locations. But when I tell you, even Stacey, like, has literally done life with me personally as a friend and as a sister. I can't tell you how many times I've even reached out. It's been times where Stacey hasn't, and sis, am I lying?
No.
She has prayed with me. We prayed for each other. Has really been there. Community is that thing that helps sustain you. It's that thing to keep you
Mm-hmm.
grounded. It reminds you sometimes when you don't have the capacity to remind yourself. Community will help pray for you when you don't have the capacity to pray for yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
like what Stacey said earlier. There are times where sometimes you have those ideas. It could be business, personal. It could be a poem that you're just trying to, whatever it is. It's just always great to have those, I'm calling them those extra strong towers that are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
something else that you mentioned, so I can tap into that as well. You talked about what has that process looked like, or what has community looked like over the years. And of course, you know, when you're younger, you just welcome everybody. You're
Yeah.
like, all right, you a friend, you a friend, you a friend,
Everybody your friend.
and which is, and I say this, I think that as life goes, everything happens, and it's seasonal and it's transitional. And
Mhm.
so, you know, of course, I just recently had a birthday, so I just hit that 39, getting ready to tap on 40 next year. So
Okay.
I'm excited about that. So when I think about 21-year-old Nisha
Mhm.
versus 39-year-old Nisha, well, it makes sense that at 21 I was just, oh yes, everybody, because it was important for me to understand the importance of, okay, because some people have a hard time just welcoming people into their lives.
Mhm.
So while I am happy that I had that viewpoint, you know, over the years, I've definitely learned a few things, like, you know, and we've talked before about sometimes like making sure that you have the right tribe around you.
Mhm.
Um, Understanding that, you know, just like you think about, you have your outer court and you have your inner court.
Yes.
There's some people that are called to do life with you along the outer court.
Mhm.
And then there's some people that God has, he's equipped them to walk with you through the highways and byways of that inner court.
Yep.
And guess what? Both positions are important.
Mhm.
Both positions are extremely important. It's important for the individual to just know which one is which, so you
That's right.
don't confuse people. Because sometimes you can have people on the outer court, and you're putting pressure on them to function as if they're part of the inner. That's not where they're supposed to be.
Woo.
Um,
Fact.
so yeah, so definitely, you know, learning those differences has definitely helped me to not only establish a strong community, but a sustainable community of friends, you know, with whom I actually consider like family. So yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. And I love that. I love that because I just think it's important, and that's one of the reasons why it was impressed upon me so hard to put this out there. Like I said, I started out doing it for the younger college kids just because my daughter was really kind of leading this effort with her friends. She has an amazing group of friends, and they really are trying to kind of put their feet out there and really make a way for themselves using their natural gifts and talents. And so this platform was just to kind of get them used to talking about their stuff, but then it evolved into something else. And so I think it's just important, and I want people to understand, you know, the different pathways, and to see that, you know, artists are multifaceted, right? And so even leading into that, you do the spoken word, you've written poetry, but there are so many different things that you have your hand into, and it all kind of ties together. So do you want to talk a little bit about, like, I definitely want you to touch on the Ella Project, and just, you know, your philanthropy within the city of Atlanta and around the country. I would love to just, you know, for you to share that, because I want people to kind of see that even though we're presenting her tonight, spoken word artist, and, you know, we're going to get into even her being a recording spoken word, a recorded and published spoken word artist, I want people to see sort of that, the different layers to Wanesha and how you're using all of the gifts you have.
Sure. So I guess I would start with the Ella Project, of course, was birthed, actually inspired by my grandmother, the late Ella Mae Spencer, who is my heart. Was raised by my grandparents. Shout out, you know, to both of them.
Mhm.
But yeah, but I lost both of them. But my grandmother was such an incredible and major influence in my life, and so the Ella Project was birthed more so from, I'd say, the foundational blueprint that she gave me, that she
Mhm.
impressed upon me. My grandmother was not a writer, but one of the things that she did was she was really instrumental in making sure that there was an environment, a safe environment for me to share and to grow in that capacity. And then not only that, she championed my gift. You know, she
Mhm.
heavily supported it. With the Ella Project, is not just geared towards poetry. So it's centered around creative arts and consulting. So there is a portion of the other project that is geared towards memorial tributes, special occasions, excuse me, weddings and anniversaries, where if an inquiry is received, a personalized poem, custom poem is created to where it is recorded. There's a discovery process where we're finding out the information to make sure that the poem is written precise about the individual whom it is intended for. And then upon delivery, it is, given to that particular person, that point of contact, so be it for funerals, weddings, anniversaries, corporate functions. And so it's just one of the visions that God gave me for the Elder Project. But in addition to that, and this is kind of a sidebar, my background is in social work and social services. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have worked in the social service arena for a little over 15 years now. And so how I was able to incorporate even that into the Elder Project. The Elder Project now has taken on community initiatives. So one of the community initiatives that we now have is called TEP Connects, which seeks to bridge the digital divide one household at a time. So now through TEP Connects, we are offering free cell phones, free tablets that are on the T-Mobile network, as well as free internet service that is provided by Xfinity. And again, this is free as long as eligibility requirements are met. And this is also through the Affordable Connectivity Program. And so, with that is me being able to, what I would say is kind of staying true to everything that my grandmother stood for. Like I said, she wasn't a writer, but she created that environment for me that was healthy. And then, she was also about not just being nice, because I'm like, anybody can be nice, but she was
Mm-hmm.
kind. And she believed in being kind to people despite whatever their circumstance was. She said, if you're not helping somebody, if you can't pick them up, for heaven's sakes, don't try to push them back down. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in that regard, when I look at the different ways that the Ella Project is growing and expanding, a lot of what she has given me has definitely helped as we have pushed these things to the forefront.
I had an opportunity I went and visited your website recently because I wanted to make sure I was trying to connect with you. I wanted to make sure I used the right email address because we would normally do our Gmail thing, but I was trying to keep this business. And so I said, let
Right.
me go on here and try to find. But I did get a chance to look at the website, and I was just so excited to see those different initiatives because I knew you had been working really hard to kind of bring all of the visions that you had for the Ella Project together. And so I just love to see how it's evolved. If you're watching on YouTube, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, there is a ticker that's going across the screen to connect with her at that website. It's ellaproject.org. Okay. And if you are listening on the podcast platforms, it's www.ellaproject.org. Please check her out. It does nothing to stop by our website and do a little perusing. You actually help. You help with insights. You help with visibility. So I absolutely love to hear that. I love to hear that. And just to think of where it started and the inspiration, I know your grandmother would be like, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And something you can tangibly even pass down to family. Like, say, for example, somebody in your family decides, hey, I want to do something like that. I want to, you're already kind of walking the pathways to kind of show them what ways to go, what not to do, how to set up business. I'll even share this tidbit. Had it not been for you, I wouldn't have had the LLCs that I had. Because I remember when you found out how to register businesses as an LLC, you told everybody you knew. Nobody was outside of getting this information. So anybody that said, "Well, I didn't know, you didn't tell me," if you knew her, she told you. She told you. You might not have been listening, but she definitely told you because I remember you saying, because when I came out the gate, I was learning everything. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about books, CDs, and all of these things. And God impressed it upon me, like, oh, you not only are you gonna come out of the gate for the first time speaking your poetry publicly, because I had just started sharing my poetry publicly in May of 2012, and by December of 2012, I released a book and a CD by the same name. And what was so interesting was, is God sent people. He sent TJ Nicole to kind of help me frame up how to write the book and put things together. Her sister helped with the editing. And then I was able to use some of the resources that Lady V had pointed me to package my CDs. Yep, you heard me say CDs. I know we are in the digital revolution. But in 2012, your girl had
Yes,
rap CDs. And
that part.
so, and you were like, once we had done that, that was 2012, 2013, 2014. And then you had started kind of looking into when you were getting ready to come out with your project, you did the work and you were looking at LLCs and all of that. And that's what really motivated me to go and really learn that business side of it. And I actually was able to take it and apply it, not just to the things that I was doing and the initiatives that I was doing, but I was able to set my family up. My husband and my son helped them get set up in business. And so now I understand, state registration versus uh, national registration, federal registration versus state registration, down to county level taxes and licensing. And I'm like, so you doing this really will, depending if you're looking for it, it will really inspire you to do more. So I love that. I love that you have planted this seed in your family's lineage where it'll yield a harvest where maybe your little cousins coming along or cousins that have little babies coming along and they look up and be like, oh, I didn't even know we had something like this in our family. I love, love, love that.
Yes, and thank you, just to kind of piggyback on what you just said, because I know I didn't mention it earlier, but and thank you for bringing it up. That with the Ella project, as Stacey said, in addition to the actual services and the community initiatives, the initial reason that the Ella project was created, we're gonna go back because, like I said, 2016 is when I actually relaunched here in Atlanta. Prior to 2016, and Stacey may remember when I shared this with her, initially the Ella project actually started in New York. I was in New York caring for my aunt at the time. This was 2014, so next year will be 10 years ago. So initially, when TEP, when the Other project started, it was literally under the premise of making sure that I had things in place to protect my writings, to protect my poetry. So, as mentioned, I do have a poetry album. My poetry album is owned by the Elder Project. Everything that's related to my writings is owned by that. And I know I've had some that would say, well, why? I was like, well, in the event, because one thing that is for certain, if you have been born into this world, one day you will leave here. And when you leave, a lot of times there are certain things that are just kind of scattered. And, Stacey mentioned earlier that, when we first started, our recording process, we had CDs. And so, the only way that you could generate any type of income, unless you had a deal where they were sitting in stores, you had to literally go out and physically sell them. And guess what? If you didn't go anywhere, your CDs did not move unless someone was calling you. But if you're really trying to get them out there, you had to do that work. And so when I began to think about, if I'm going to leave something, if I'm going to create something that's going to sustain and live beyond me, what does that look like logistically? And so, I'm like, if I'm leaving something for, family, I can't expect them to put a bunch of CDs in the car and just go selling that stuff after. I'm like, that's not fair to them. And so, when we started having that conversation and looking at, getting the LLC, getting everything copyrighted and saved up under there, getting everything registered, Nelson and SoundScan, all these different things. So that way, if my poetry is, playing somewhere on the air, is playing somewhere, that's being tracked. So then, you look at your differences, your choices between BMI and ASCAP, and you're looking at your royalties and where these different things are going. So that way you're generating something that's going to be able to not only show and prove, long after, but it will make its own money. It will do its own thing. Now, of course, I'm not out here with the type of numbers like a Kirk Franklin. Ain't nobody like, oh, go ahead and tune in and listen to Wanesha. No, I'm definitely not saying that. But I do believe that a lot of times when you take things serious, people take you serious.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And my thing is, if you stay in position, be ready, stay ready. You don't have to get ready, because you just never know. Seasons change, and you never know what type of season that you're in, to where something is happening. And sometimes an opportunity, some opportunities are missed simply because there are these small details that we didn't put in place.
Yes. I'm telling you, it was a game changer for me. So I don't know if you want to. I know you do the creative consulting on the Ella project. I don't know if you want to add in there. All right, now, if you are an artist, I can do this whole master class for you for $249.99. I listen.
Oh,
Look,
I'm
I don't know.
planting seeds.
For 12 easy payments of $49.95.
Not the 12 easy thing.
Because I mean, honestly, if you want to do the work, it's worth it, right? Because I remember you and I having those conversations, and even though I never called back to do the part three of the conversations where we were getting all the information and stuff together, I did take that information very seriously. Like even putting together my documentation for my family, I sat down and had a conversation with them, letting them know where everything was, and this is how you get to this, and this is where you go to get this, and it's important for you to for your intellectual property to have beneficiaries assigned to it. Like,
Absolutely.
don't think because your life insurance says such and such is my beneficiary that your intellectual property and your published works and all those things don't need to have a
Yeah.
direct point of contact tied to it that needs to be updated every 3 months. Every 3 months. So I can appreciate that part of it too, which I'm hoping that the listening audience will see that it's so much more like the gift that you have, yes, you give of it freely. You can serve and pour out and pour out and pour out. But we know God to work where God will use everything you have to provide for you in so many different ways. So I love that business side of your artistry doesn't take away from it, it adds to it. As a matter of fact, it brings that air of seriousness, like you said, because a lot of times people associate when it comes to artistry, they associate it with starving or starving. I ain't starving. I'm not nobody's starving artist, okay? That's what I'm not. And
Okay.
so I can appreciate that. And so I want to talk a little bit more. I want to kind of bounce back to your spoken word. Actually, no, I don't. No, I don't. I want to talk about those community efforts, when you were out there protesting, when you were out there, your petitions. I want to know, I want the whatever sphere of influence that this podcast has. I want those individuals to hear about that, because that for me, I'm gonna tell you, it was a lot of things keeping our eyes glued in 2020. But I following your journey and the things that you were doing around that time, the things that you have been doing, like this ain't new to you. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. If you
Okay.
don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. So, and I tell people, like, don't get it twisted. I might sit and look, but trust me, I will get out there and raise my fist, sit at some tables, and say what needs to be said, because truly love community. I love people, and I'm for fairness when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to just treating people right and doing right by people, doing right by community. I always say, if you're in a position, see something, say something. If you're in a position and you know that there are different tables that, because I feel like nothing happens by chance. God doesn't afford certain spaces for you to be in to just sit there and take up space. And so I know what I represent. I know the family that I come from. I understand, the compound surrounded around my upbringing. And so shame on me to go into a space where I know it is like purpose for me to make sure that I'm advocating for those that may not have that voice, or they're not afforded that opportunity to come there and say something. So I'm gonna go old school. There's an old hymn that says, a charge to keep I have, there's a charge to keep that I have. And
Mm-hmm.
so because
Mm-hmm.
I cannot afford to be silent no matter what the situation is. But going back, and you spoke on 2020, 2021, we were dealing with the pandemic. That was at the same time we were dealing with the murders of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor. of so many others, the young man who was murdered here in Atlanta as well.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
for me, I was definitely out protesting, but that wasn't my definitely was not my first rodeo. My very first protest that I attended, I was actually in elementary school. My grandmother went with me. There was something going on in my neighborhood. And so we, me and my grandmother, we went, she took me, and I was just happy as a little clam just to be out there and voice have my little sign, and I'm just, yeah, but and then not only that, I'll say this too, I also grew up watching, what they call, typically it's the channel that most people ease on by, the community access channel. We
Mhm.
watching
Mhm.
real time a lot of the city council meetings. And so I'm like in elementary school, middle school, and I'm glued to the city channel. And it was my dream for a long time, which a lot of people don't notice. I actually started out as I was a political science major at one point.
Mm.
I was
Okay.
convinced that I was going to go into politics at a very early age. When I was younger, I volunteered on Councilman Frank Peterman, who represented the Florida House of Representatives. I volunteered on his campaign. I was knee deep. I was like, I'm going to be a politician.
Ah.
I'm going to work for the government. I'm trying to change. And so what happened is that once I started studying, I realized that I had a greater tug at my heart for the community and working in real time with the people of the community.
Mhm.
So while I decided not to go that route in terms of, maintaining the major in politics, that community piece still goes hand in hand, because either you're talking about the situations that are happening with the people in the community, or you're working directly with the people in the community. Both
Yep.
run parallel to me. Um, but no, that particular year, what, 2020, 2021, I was the founding member, one of the founding members and presidents of an organization called Take the Torch, which was a leg of another organization, a foundation located here in Atlanta called the Stewart Foundation. And so that was built upon the seven spheres of influence. And so we actually had advisors, one being, of course, Mr. Hank Stewart, Ms. Gwendolyn Mason, Maureen Stubbs, and the late, great Miss Jemita O.J. Orange, whose father was actually Reverend James Orange, who was one of the organizers for Dr. King. He used to organize all of Dr. King's marches, during that time span, during the civil rights movement. And so coming up under that type of, I'm going to say, training and tutelage, it gave me just like, it ignited my fire even more. And so, considering everything that was happening, we started looking at, well, you know what? Now we're at the space where, a lot of us, like, I'm an 80s baby, born in the 80s, raised in the 90s. And so when you start putting those things in perspective, I'm an 80s baby, born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, that's getting ready to turn 40 next year. So what does
Mhm.
that mean? Glad you asked. That means that we are now officially, we the aunties and uncles, we the
Uh-huh.
generation that we're at that space where, sometimes we're like, sometimes I see these posts online that's like, what, things done changed, now that we don't meet up at grandmama house no more. And what happened to yesteryear? It's because our generation is not, that's our responsibility now.
Mhm.
We literally have a responsibility. We are in that space, because the fact that I'm tapping on 40, that means that those who were taking on a lot of those different responsibilities, they've gotten older now. So, bringing it back in, because I kind of, deviated a little bit, but we have responsibilities now in terms of what our call is. And so we Take the Torch. It was it was such an amazing collective of friends and other peers that represented almost every sphere you can think of, from education to health to music. We have representatives that were on, that literally are on Broadway right now, from scientists. We had those that are in ministry. We're talking about religious professors. I mean, it was just educators, you name it. We had every sphere that was represented. And so it was a very unique collective of millennials who really, understood that. We no
Mhm.
longer, unfortunately, we no longer meet. And so the group, after the pandemic, kind of dispersed. But the beautiful thing is that one thing about it is that There are some people that come into an organization and they learn to be a leader.
Yep.
That was created to where people were already leading
Yep.
in their respective spheres. And so because of that, it's just a blessing that all of us were, still connected, could still reach out. Hey, I got this going on, what's going, and so we still, and blessings to any of them that may be listening. Love you guys and so happy to call you family as well.
See, I knew we went down the right road when we started talking about this. Just because it explains, a little bit more, because the goal of this is to get to know you and listen to the, and talk amongst artistry and things like that. But it kind of, it circles. You had that social work background, educational background that funneled right into this. And even the social work, like you said, you kind of liaise between the community, and depending on the type of influence you have, like that organization, some influence, you could, get in the rooms with some of the lawmakers and some of the game changers. And so I absolutely love, love, love that. So we're going to circle back around to Wanesha V. Spencer, the artist, because this conversation would not happen if I did not talk about Down My Sidewalk. Because, baby, listen to me. All right? All right, listen to me. I know I can pick it up on all of the streaming platforms, and I do. I have it in my phone. I downloaded it, yes, but I got that CD because, honey, listen. Let me explain something to y'all. This is not one of those Office Depot CDs where you open it up and the case breaks immediately, and then you just got the little black part with your CD snapped in there. That was my CD, people. That was mine. That was mine. This was such a professionally packaged CD that if you have it, I tell you, I got one. If I could get up and run across the room, I got one. And it's still in mint condition because I bought one and then she gave me some to donate when we had like these raffles and giveaway. And I kept one in mint condition because, like you said, you just never know. I'm gonna be like, I got one of those. You do? Are you selling it? I'm not. I'm not. And so I want to talk about that. If you don't mind, you can talk about that. You can talk about it in whatever scope you want to. If you want to talk about the behind the scenes that led up to it, or you want to talk about the creative process, go at it.
Sure. So down my sidewalk, that's the while I don't have any physical children that are here, when I tell you down my sidewalk, that's my baby. That's that thing that God placed in me, and I'm so thankful to Him that I was able to birth that. It means a lot. Down my sidewalk, a journey through pain, growth, and forgiveness is a collection of poems that are literally pulled from the pages of my life and journey. So we're talking, some of the poems on that album were written at the age of 14, 13, 14. And then there's some poems that was written, I'm like in my, late 20s. I think one made it in that was like in my early 30s. And so it is, like I said, is one of my greatest works. And one of the things too, I think for me is that I remember when, I would see other people I would see other artists that would have their books, I would see other artists that would have their albums. And, sometimes a thing seems larger than life until you actually start doing it. And so I remember just a lot of the, you start talking yourself out of stuff, and don't take my chance. Like, as we're talking and we're sharing all the different things, trust me, when I tell you I'm my biggest critic, and at times I can be super hard on myself. And it's in those moments where I have that grateful, faithful village, that community that will remind me, kind of help, stir me back. But as it relates to the project, it was such a labor of love. Was able to work with some amazing artists during that process. My recording engineer, Richard Mills, my graphic designer, Maurice Novembre, my project manager, Ashton Williams, was able to work with Martine Babanga, who was the fashion consultant, Talisha Conyers, who helped with, my hair and other stylings, Nicole White, who took up photography. It was mastered over in London at Abbey Road Studios. Jeff Pinchay, who has worked with everybody from Patti LaBelle to
Love it.
some of the others. So it was, for me, it was, I went a specific route for a few different reasons. One, I graduated from high school, from a performing arts school. So when it comes to scoring, we think about like movie scores. I wanted, and this was just me, for my very first album, I was like, I know I wanted to go somewhere. I have my albums in somewhere to where there would be a heavy concentration on the voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, I was like, well, you know what? If I wanted to be a certain way, this was my standard, not anybody else's standard. This was my
Mm-hmm.
standard. And so for me, that was a big thing. Also working with Pinky down at Big Three Studios. He also mastered a few of the tracks, engineered as well. Justin Moore, who he actually worked on my last track entitled Right. So there was just so Dustin Dearman. I mean, there were so many people that were involved in the project that helped make it, and even the process of creating it. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are some cool things. Like if you listen to it, like my favorite, I think, between jury duty, because it takes place as if I'm in a courtroom, and
That's the
so
one I like, and I like the one. Gosh, it's the one where you mentioned. Golly, it sounds like you're in the city. Somebody's
um,
walking down the.
my
Yeah.
mama was a Rolling Stone. Well, yeah, it's like you hear like the doo-wop singles, and you hear the
Yes.
birds, and you hear when I tell it was so much fun creating it, and I think that's where my performance schooling kind of came in, because I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a poet, but it was also important. I wanted people to be able to listen to the album and visualize everything that's happening while they're listening to it. And as with some of the feedback that I did get, it does sound like that was kind of conveyed, because some people was just like, man, it was like I felt like I was listening to a movie that I was able to kind of imagine, which
Yes.
that was the whole point. Like you hear like the steps when we're outside, you could hear the walking on Mama Was a Rolling Stone, and like we literally took mics and we put them in an empty room, and I put on heels and I'm walking back and forth, and we're just stopping and recording. Let's listen to these footsteps and see if these footsteps sound believable. Let me start walking back. So it was so intricate in terms of the detailing, because
Mhm.
we really wanted to paint that picture from a creative aspect.
I love it. And you did a good job.
Thank you.
So if you don't have it, if you, I'm sure y'all got all the streaming platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, all of the things.
Yeah.
Wanesha Spencer, for the people that are listening on the podcast platforms, Wanesha Spencer. And if you find more than one Wanesha Spencer, it's Wanesha V Spencer. And the name of the project is Down My Sidewalk. You cannot miss it. Big, beautiful afro, chocolate sun kissed skin. I mean, you listen, if you, even if you are not a spoken word poetry person, because I've had people say to me, I'll invite them to something, they're like, oh, I ain't really into poetry. And then I let them listen to something, and I'm gonna just be honest with you, Wanisha. Majority of the time, I'm pointing back to you, because the way you put your, you can tell you put your heart into it, right? And so that when I hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't really get into poetry like that," I want them to hear something like that, where they can hear that the effort was put into it. And I mean, it really is. It's an excellent project. And I mean, if you have never experienced the spoken word before, or if you have experienced it and consider yourself a connoisseur, listen to this project. That's all I'm gonna say about that. So, and thank you for producing it, because listen, it really is good. Like I know you got other stuff that will come down the line for you, which we're gonna get into that. But I just want you to know that that you did your big one coming out the gate. Like so, so I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about maybe some things that you are working on right now. I know the Ella project, you're actively currently doing the things you're doing with it, but what are some things that, are you re-envisioning your journey as an artist? Are you taking a pause? Because that's totally okay too. You don't always have to be doing something, but what is Wanesha doing right now?
Right. So I can appreciate that question for a lot of different reasons. So as it stands right now, and I kind of go back to the Ella project because they're both kind of intertwined. So for instance, the with the memorial tributes that I have. So I'm in the process where I am working with some funeral homes in terms of like creating memorial pieces, for those that have, unfortunately, lost a family member, relative. And so, memorial poetry, to be honest, that's actually, even though it's connected to the church, that's when I actually first started writing poems and was getting invited to share, like
Mm-hmm.
outside of doing something for church. I was being asked to, write personalized poems for funerals. When I was 14, that's actually literally how I made my extra little money on the side. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when, the prices, look, today's prices is not yesterday's prices. Cause I was like $15, $10 was real cheap, so reasonable. Um, but for me, it was more so about, and I'm gonna tell you this: if I could have, this is another point. If I could have done it for free, I would have. It was my grandmother who actually encouraged me to put a price tag on what I was doing. And I remember it like it was yesterday because when we got the first call, I was just so happy that I was asked. So I was like, sure. And I just wrote my poem and did that. And so then, we started getting a few more calls and a few more calls. And then before you knew it, a lot of my weekends, I'm in middle school, so I don't drive, but my grandfather does. So now he's taking me around to different places in the city. And on my Saturdays, when most kids will be playing or doing, something else, I'm at somebody's church, family reunion, baby shower, whatever it is, uh, poetry. And I remember my grandmother saying, she was like, you have to charge something. She said, I don't care what you charge. She was like, but you need to charge something. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I remember when she told me that, I came up with a number in my head and I was like, $20. And
Mm-hmm.
she didn't even argue with the price because I realized now, as an adult, that what she was trying to do is get me to understand that what I did had value.
Mm-hmm.
I think about like you are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
What I did, yes, shout out to Stacy. But what it did was it reminded me, or it instilled in me at an early age that it was worth something. And I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes we can, and I'm not talking about, I don't know, there's one thing to be humble, and then there's something else to move in false humility. And sometimes there's some folks that are like, oh no, I can't, it's just everything's just for free. And
And
it's like,
then when they don't get it, they got something to say.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've been called to be good stewards. Like we're called to
Mm-hmm.
be good stewards over what God has entrusted us with. These giftings are one of them. And so, and like I said, and I'm not speaking of some artists that are out there and they're paying and they're getting top dollars. That's awesome. This message isn't for you. This message is for those that, don't realize, or they've fallen in a place where they've been accustomed to giving it away so much so to where they even feel ashamed or they feel weird or they feel apprehensive about now understanding that, what I do does have value to it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let anyone exploit your gift. Don't let anyone pimp your gift. I know we kind of deviated and I don't clearly we were supposed to go down this direction, I guess, but
Well, that's okay. That's okay. That's that's okay. That's okay because no, it's important. I think it's important. I think that I just don't think that it is talked about enough, especially in the space of spoken word and poetry.
yeah.
Especially. you know. And I love that you pointed out that your grandmother taking that teachable moment to just help you to understand that the things that you pour out of you, they're valuable. That doesn't mean you're putting a price tag on everything you do. It's just that you understand that if you keep, just pouring out and pouring out and pouring out and nothing is returned, you ultimately gonna end up empty. You're gonna end up empty, you're gonna end up burnt out, and I listen, no turns that in this conversation that we've had were wrong turns. Not nail time. Not nail time. Just because the goal is, I just really want people to understand, you know, t- tap into what's happening inside of you. You may not be a poet. Like when I was talking to those kids, let me stop calling. They are young adults. But when
I,
I was talking to them, and they were talking so passionately about, their media types and the stuff that they like to do and how they came to do it, if I picked up a paintbrush, you would laugh because I can't. But to hear them sit down and discuss, the space that they were in, or the things that they pulled from to produce these amazing pieces of work, it's the same thing. If you don't have to be a singer, you don't have to be a dancer, you don't have to be a instrument player, but there's something in you that you can create. There's a gift that you have that makes you a creative. So I love how you're sharing these personal experiences, and even how we're affected in our community, poetry, our spoken word poetry community. you know they literally, I'm so thankful that now there's a category for spoken word and poetry in the Grammy, where actual poets that we might see at an open mic are actually being nominated and
that
potentially
part.
winning.
That part, and I hate that I can't think of his name. The gentleman who won the spoken word category, the Grammy category. Gosh, I
Mhm.
can't think of his name. Shout out to him, because I think for every, like you said, for every poetry spoken word artist, you saw that and you were just like, wow, like that's
Mhm.
big. Shout out to all the other. I know we know quite a few Emmy award winning poets, Emmy nominated poets. And so that's, they have paved the way for so many of us. And so definitely, shout out to them as well.
I love it. I love it. So before we end this amazing, me and you could talk all
Yes.
day. You
All
already
day.
know what it is.
Literally.
If you want to connect with Wanesha, I will be putting her social media platforms in the description of the YouTube video, as well as the description of the podcast platform summaries. But make sure you connect with her on Instagram. She's on Facebook. And let's see, I gave you guys her Ella Project website. Just connect with her. If you happen to purchase her project, I'm listen, just buy the dang on thing, okay? But if you happen to get it, drop her a message and let her know what you thought of it. I'm telling you, it's a great investment. You won't regret it. You just won't. So, Wanesha, I thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I give one last little shout out?
Absolutely.
To my friends and family, especially in St. Petersburg, my aunties, my cousins. I love y'all. Auntie Priscilla, Aunt Regina, uncles Passion, Tidrin, Chelsea, Isaiah, Darius, all of my cousins, Alicia, Talisha. I know that's just like real, real
Okay.
real extra, but I feel like it's important. It's definitely important to me. My best friend Pebbles, my godmother, Miss Lula Holmes, Samantha, Mama Kay, cousin Pauline, Marshall, cousin Tommy, cousin Timmy. Wait a minute, hold on, and my mama. I love y'all. Lord,
I want to thank my mama. What?
Lord,
You're
my
gonna be
mama
like,
be like,
hold on,
mommy is your
hold on.
wife. I love you, mama. You are the best. I cannot thank you enough. Without you, there is no me. You birthed me. You brought me into this world. Greatest gift. I think I redeemed myself. Okay.
No, thank you so much. And so if you are listening to this episode and you like what you heard, leave us a comment like, comment, or subscribe on YouTube. I have said this before, I will say it every single episode. Be respectful. Because if you are not respectful, as much as you have heard me talk about Jesus, I will be disrespectful back. Okay? So I just want to say that. I say that every episode. I just know different. And if you are listening on the podcast streaming platforms, please leave a review about this show, about these episodes, because that's the best way that you can help podcast platforms is by leaving a review. You can subscribe if you want. I'm not going to force you to. If you like the content, subscribe so you can hear more. Wanesha, thank you again so much for being here. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we will be back with another episode of When Artists Speak. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night.